G'day, guys. Welcome to another live stream. Today we have Rob. How are you, mate?
Doing well, doing well. It's good to be back. It's been some time and excited to, discuss mining. We're gonna get a little deep today, so I'm excited about it.
Yeah, it's always good to sort of run these sort of discussions as well because we all started from nowhere, basically just a whole heap of reading and asking questions and everything like that. So hopefully we can provide some insight into crypto mining, just in regards to all the components needed for the hardware side, but then also even just connecting to a mining pool itself. So yeah, do you want to kick things off, mate? Sort of just give a bit of an overrun of what a sort of mining rig is and what mining is in general, I think.
Yeah, sure. And I think just like you said, it's we get a lot of inquiries obviously in some of our socials about, how do I mine Ergo in general, right? And even down to, what's the best GPU and how do you where do you go from there? Like I have a GPU, now what, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit more complex than that, right? There's definitely a lot of information out there, but there's several ways to mine. So taking a step back, right? You look at proof of work mining as a whole. There's GPU mining, obviously, which is what we're going to dive into today. There's ASIC mining. There's FPGA mining now, and then also, there is CPU mining, which is not really that efficient, not that profitable, but it is out there. And then there's
Yeah.
you can go into all sorts of other things like proof of storage, proof of stake, and they consider that mining, but we won't go down that road today. But we want to focus on proof of work mining, right? Specifically with GPUs. So
Yeah.
GPU or graphics card is, more and more layman's terms is generally used for gaming, right? I think that's probably one of the main functions of a graphics card, outside of AI development and other things that are used more on the industry side of things. But more or less, that is the main piece of hardware that's utilized in order to, and again, we won't go down a rabbit hole because we want to keep this very high level and very easy for people to follow. But it's used to mine and to solve the equations and to basically, at the end of the day, that's what's used to find blocks, and then rewards are paid out to miners. So the graphics card itself is probably the first thing I would focus on, and there's a lot out there, right? But
Yeah, you've got
AM
the red versus green side of things, so the AMD versus Nvidia, and you got the fanboys on sort of both sides there. So it's even kind of carries over to the CPU side, like Intel versus AMD, and yeah, people can get
exactly.
quite tribal here.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I've myself have been on the AMD side for quite some time. I've also obviously worked with NVIDIA cards as well, and they both have their strengths, right? And I think that at the end of the day, you kind of do some research, you look into it, but there's a lot of options out there. So I mean, I think that's probably one of the starting points. But when you take a look at it as a whole, right, there's ways to kind of mine with the GPU, right? There's a
Yeah,
lot of miners out there that they have a gaming computer, right? And it's they can build a computer, and they can they play in all their games on there, and they're using that GPU, right?
yeah,
Now a lot of these people, they like to kind of, when they're not playing games, they turn it on and they're trying to mine crypto. So I mean, that's kind of like, I would say, probably the easiest way to get into mining. Just go buy a gaming computer that has a decent GPU,
yeah,
and you can kind of figure it out from there, and we'll get into what that means. But that more or less is what a mining rig is. It's extended, but if you
yeah,
think about building a computer, right, you have a motherboard, you have a CPU or a processor, you have memory, you have fans that you need for cooling and cables, and we'll get into all those fine details. But you know essentially that's what a mining rig is, just bigger or larger, right? And you're using a more dedicated motherboard for mining, which has more connection points that allow you to
yeah.
kind of grow and expand this mining rig. But
I think
in a
that's a perfect
sense,
way to sort of summarize it as well. Is
yeah,
it's not really complicated in that sense. It's just basically a computer with multiple graphic cards, in the simplest terms. So to sort of, if people sort of get tripped up on a terminology and things like that, that's probably the simplest way to sort of just summarize what a mining rig is. A
exactly. I
GPU
mean,
mining rig, that is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it like you said, I think people, they hear mining rig and they like think it's so complex, but
Yeah,
if you've ever put together a computer or, swapped out a memory card or, RAM or whatever, you know, you know what you're kind of doing. So, I mean, if you can tinker in that sense, I think, that's the easiest way to go about it. But,
yeah,
I think we want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into, all right, we mentioned all those components high level, but how do you build a mining rig from there, right? I think, the computer build is what it is, but I think that when you build a mining rig itself, there's a little bit more that goes into it, right? We can talk about things like risers and, versus riserless boards. And
yeah,
there's a lot of options out there, right? I think that technology has developed. So I think that's where we should, dig in. We'll focus in on that and kind of,
yeah.
hopefully give a good overview for miners that are, or people just looking to, figure out how to mine. Where do I get started, right? So,
Yeah,
uh,
I think it's just probably just say a bit of a disclaimer here as well. Is like there's no sort of right or wrong answer here as well on how you sort of go about building a mining rig. There's like multiple options that sort of are out there that, in essence, you can go down. So you can have basically just a simple motherboard, and then have the risers like you just mentioned. You can have extended motherboards, which basically you plug all your GPUs in. There's like you said on the GPU front, you don't need the most powerful sort of processor. It doesn't matter if it's Intel, AMD. It's just basically sort of allowing the connection there to try and get as many GPUs and just be as profitable as that's basically your business model there to try and be as most profitable as can be. So that sort of carries over into the component pricing side as well. So you don't really sort of want to go out and buy something that's necessarily high end, because that can sort of just eat into your base cost there.
yeah, and that's what I tell a lot of people. They come into the chats and they're like, what's the best GPU to purchase? What has the most hash rate? And it's just like, well, the first thing is it really depends on your budget, right? How much are you
Yeah,
willing to spend? You can buy one GPU, you can buy hundreds, right? So I mean, it's there's different ways to look at it. And right now is actually a good time to kind of be building some of this stuff
yeah,
because prices have haven't been cheaper. I mean, at least since I've been mining, so it's been interesting to kind of see that decline in prices, but it
yeah,
went with the market too, so I mean it goes hand in hand. But I think if you're interested or wanting to get into mining, now's the time to buy before the prices will go back up to 3 4x, and there will be complications. So
exactly. So some of those components, I think you've got your handbook there. Do you want to sort of share your screen and we can start running through a
yeah,
couple of things?
so let me pull that up now. All right, is it popped up?
Yep, all good.
All right. So I mean, this is, it's funny. This is one of the things that I actually worked on when I first entered the Ergo community. There was, there's this, it's the Ergo Not Handbook. It's been developed by community members. I think Mark Glasgow started it. And, there was, when I kind of got my hands on it, it was really outdated. It was still talking about before, outsourceability and all that stuff. So, I mean, it
Yeah,
was really, needed an update. And, it probably needs an update at this point in time. We probably need to bring it to version 3. We try to keep it, as fresh as possible. But there's some things like fees and stuff like that that may not be current.
yeah,
But other than that, I still think it's a good tool. It really gets into mining as a whole with Ergo. It really, it shows you how to mine on Hive, how to mine on Windows, talks about the what is Ergo, gets really deep into the algorithm. It actually brings you to the explanation in the white paper. We get into a lot here, so we're not going to go through all this yet. I don't think that I really wanted to focus so much on this, but again, this is a good tool. I really want to kind of scroll down and we'll focus in on the hardware.
yep,
So again, GPUs, they come in, all different shapes and sizes and, gigabytes and memory and all that stuff, right? And it's just like, what does that mean?
yep,
And every algorithm kind of has its own DAG table, and it's really, the memory that needs to be processed on the DAG table. And it's basically the GPUs or the algo has a certain, um, certain DAG limit, and it changes over time. And then, there's ways to look at that, right? So, I use miner stat a lot. there's a DAG calculator there. You can go to the algorithm, or it goes down here, and you can kind of see what the current status is.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, I mean, look, a lot of these are around 2, 3, 4. Some GPUs, they don't even, even if it's at 2.5 or 3, they may not even run, even if it's a 4 GB card.
Yeah.
I always suggest to people, think in the future, right? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously it takes years and years and years for this to change, but
Yeah.
you never know, right? I mean, I always say look at 8 GB cards or higher. I mean, you could go 16, 32. There's multiple out there, but
Yeah.
it really doesn't impact necessarily the performance of the card currently. As the DAG table changes, yes, it will. But you could have a 32 GB card and an 8 GB card, and they could both have, 100 mega hash per card. And I'm just using, kind of
Yeah.
whole numbers here, but from a life expectancy standpoint, if you want to continue to mine these coins through the life of them, then obviously I would recommend buying a card that has a higher gigabytes.
Yeah, and just on that as well, like we've got the ETH merge coming up, so there's probably going to be a lot of sort of the lower end cards, I think, probably coming onto the market first. So if you wanted to grab a 4 gig or a 6 gig for that instance, if it's a reasonably priced card, then it's probably not too bad of a deal to be able to like just dip your toes into the waters there. Just to get your head around it and get comfortable with mining is probably one option.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, just quick story. The first way I got into mining before I even started building a rig was I had a gaming computer. It was a laptop. It had a 3060 laptop, GPU
Get the
in there.
fans spinning on there.
Got the fan spinning, and the thing was on fire all the time. And I was never getting, what a real 3060 would put out.
Yeah.
But it was efficient. It was like 80 watts, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it was, I was enough for me to kind of get my feet wet, test it out,
Yeah.
understand how to mine, and then I just kind of grew from there. But yeah, I mean, check the used market, start there. You can get something really, really cheap. There's cards
Yeah.
for $100 these days. Um, Start off small. Don't go out and buy your first card as a 3090. You know what I mean? It's you can, but it's just you're wasting your money.
Yeah.
Get your feet wet. You don't want to burn a beautiful card like that, right? People
Yeah.
make mistakes. We all have, and I just recommend starting off small.
Yeah. Just on that as well, like another option, like say you're heavily in gaming and you want a 3090 just for the latest high end specs for the biggest games, and who knows what sort of size monitor do you have and everything like that. But on the flip side of that, you can kind of offset some of the initial purchase cost by mining in the background when you aren't actually gaming itself. I think that's one of the major beneficiaries or benefits, sorry, for GPU mining.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And look, I think, that's a very good point because look, there's all different kinds of miners, right? And it all
Yeah.
depends on really what you're looking for. But yeah, you do. I mean, I've even seen recently in some of the socials, people are actually mining and gaming at the same time, or mining and running an ergo node at the same time, right? So
Yep.
they're using all of that processing power, and their system's running well, right? So
Yep.
there are dual uses to the GPUs. So
Yeah.
even if you're a graphics artist, right? I mean, I think
Yep.
people use it for that sense as well. So I mean,
Yeah.
again, there's multiple uses to the GPU, and it's just what makes sense for you. Is it purely a mining card, or are you using it for some other functionality?
Yep.
And the OEMs, the manufacturers, there are cards out there that are dedicated to mining, right? They
Yep.
don't have the ports or the outputs to connect to a screen or a display or anything like that. So I mean, those are more heavily focused on the mining industry.
Yeah, by all means. So that's one component, or like basically the major component there for GPU mining. But actually, to create the rig itself, what's some of the other hardware that we require?
Yeah, so I mean, I always say start with the motherboard. And
Yeah.
again, on this page, and just real quick, there is, if you go to the graphics cards, we do have a list of probably all the way through 30 series on NVIDIA, and then probably all through the 6000 series on AMD. But it will take you to the OEM site. It will actually link to profitability on what to mine too. So
Yep.
for each graphics card. So, if you want to see profitability, I mean, that's kind of the best way we recommend people to do it. Go out and do your research, because it changes every day, right? So,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
yeah, but focusing on the motherboards, and I'll just kind of click here. And many people refer to it as a MOBO, right? But that's a motherboard is kind of the heart of your mining rig, right? And that's basically the board that's used to kind of interface everything together, right? Again, you have your CPU, which is your processor, which kind of controls everything. It's the brain of the computer. That would go into the motherboard. You have your memory that would also go into the motherboard. All of your power connections would go into the motherboard to power it all up, power up the GPUs, at least from the riser standpoint. And then ancillary equipment like fans and all sorts of things would all connect or interface with the motherboard. So I mean, that's again, it's like the body of your mining, right? Just think of it that way.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of options out there, right? So I'll kind of scroll down. I'll show you some of the different suppliers, but ASRock, Asus, BioStar. I mean, you could go on and on. They all the major OEMs or manufacturers of computer components are more or less making either a mining board or a gaming board, which could also be used for mining. But
Yeah.
there's again
So on the
different.
motherboard side, you've just
Yeah.
touched on sort of just the sort of what it actually does. But from the GPU side, what's one of the major things that's required on the like a motherboard in regards to sort of connectivity?
Sure. So a PCIe slot. So that's
Yep.
kind of the main thing that would be required. And there's, a lot of different forms of the slots. I think, there's some newer 3.0 and I think even 4.0 is out now. But,
Yep.
I think that's kind of what would help you decide which direction you're going in, right?
Yeah.
You could have one slot, right? A standard computer usually has one or two slots. Um, you can buy 3 slots. You can even, I think there's boards out there now that are 20 plus. So there's definitely options. And here I think I have something that I could pull up and I'll show you. Now, this is an ASRock, and this is actually a motherboard that I have. It's the H110 Pro.
Yep.
This is a mining board, but what you can see here is there are multiple slots on this board. There is one full slot. So when people look at a GPU, they see, a slot that's probably about that size, or
Yep.
but there's also smaller ports as well. So we'll get into that, and that's where the risers come into play. But on this board, there's actually 13 slots. So I currently have 13 GPUs running on this motherboard. So
Yep.
that's kind of a way to really decide from a purchase standpoint, how far do you want to go? Do you just want a small mining rig? You want 6 cards, 12 cards, and you can go on and on. But as you expand, obviously you would need a new motherboard to kind of grow beyond whatever that current motherboard covers.
Yeah. So that's yes, the number of your PCI slots basically determines your size of your rig. So, and then that cost base as well. So, say you find one with 6 slots, and so you're going to build a 6 GPU mining rig for the most part, unless you want to split the PCI slots. Then once again, but that sort of determines the size of your rig, and then your power capacity and everything sort of all just ties into that rig capacity there. Just sort of determined by your PCIe number slots.
Exactly right. I mean, and there's some math and some factoring that you need to do as you build this, because like you said, there are power requirements as you scale, and there's ways to solve that. But
Yep.
this is one form of a mining motherboard. Again, there's gaming that you can use as well. And then there's what they call riserless mining boards. So this would
Yep.
be an example of that. See if I can scan in here. These are all full slots. You can see they're kind of directly on the board. The board's much bigger, and it allows direct connectivity to the mining board, or to the mining board with the GPU, which I like in a sense. I think it saves on some of the maintenance with risers, which can be problematic. They're not necessarily always the best quality, right? So
Not wrong.
yeah, so I mean, we've all probably burned a few at least, right?
Yeah.
And it's a point of failure too. So I mean, if you look
Yeah.
at it from that standpoint,
That's the point I was just to make as well. It just takes out just sort of that middleman, sort of, if you kind of want to look at it like that. So you saw on the previous motherboard, you've got the PCI little, uh, just basically the extension slots that you have to put your PCI riser in. It just takes that sort of the riser, the USB cable, and then the actual riser that connects to your GPU out of the equation. So it's just direct connection into the motherboard.
Exactly right. So it makes things a lot easier. And risers are finicky. They they have their own challenges. So I mean, it's definitely something that you may want to consider as you're looking into mining. Now, the challenge with the riserless boards is they are usually limited to a smaller number of GPUs that can be connected. I think I've
Yeah.
seen there's 8 out there. I
Well, it's
actually have,
basically, the Octa so go up to 12, I believe. That's the
yeah.
single board as well. So yeah.
Yeah, we were going to get into that as kind of the all-in-one
Yeah.
package, but yeah, those are options too. But
Yeah.
from just standard purchasing the motherboard, I think there's an 8 out there that you can purchase, and they call them BTC boards.
Yeah.
They've always called them that. So I mean, that may be another way to look them up.
Just a couple of shout outs here. So shout out to Ergo Minnow. Howdy, mate. Andy Lowe. Good evening, gentlemen, he says. Hey, mate. And then
Hey
just a
guys,
couple of questions as well we've got from Brandon and Ergo Minnow. So you mentioned fans earlier, Rob. What would you typically recommend for an open air rig? He wants to upgrade his fans to have a more sort of CFM or RPM.
you know it.
The list is endless there, I guess.
It is, it's funny. There's different ways to do it. I mean, I think the most CFM, the most bang for your buck is it's funny enough, you just go buy some box fans and strap
Yeah.
them in front of your rig. I mean, that's you'll definitely get the most airflow out of that.
And you can
But if
pick them up
you're
at pennies basically around everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And then, if you're looking more into like case fans, you know what I mean? Just like a standard case fans. I always look at server fans.
Yeah.
I mean, you could even go on eBay. There's like, just exhaust fans that you can buy just for server cases that are pretty intense airflow, and you don't have to go out and buy the fancy names, and
Yeah.
unless you want all the colors and the LED, then
Well, we
go
all
out.
know, mate, the RGB
Yeah.
adds extra hash rate.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I mean, it's all a matter of preference. I tend to do both. I give it a little flare, and then for my cards that tend to have higher thermal impact, like my Vegas, I tend to use just some standard server fans that give it a lot
Yeah.
of airflow.
And just on the cooling front as well, like you can have a smaller fan running at a higher RPM to get the same airflow as a sort of larger fan running at a smaller RPM. So there's different power, and sort of one of the big things then is just the noise as well. So if you have a larger capacity or larger diameter fan running at a lower RPM but moving the same amount of air, you have less, a little bit less noise there as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And as you scale up, the fans definitely they do compound. So I mean, things can get quite loud, and
Yeah.
especially if, and maybe this is a nice segue, if you're using a server PSU, right, versus
Yeah.
an ATX PSU. So that's kind of one of the next components I would say we probably should talk about. So PSU, or power supply, it's what's bringing power to everything, right? It's powering up the motherboard, it's powering up all the ancillary equipment, it's powering up the GPUs. I mean, literally everything that needs power is being powered by the power supply. And there's obviously different choices. I use ATX, they're quieter. I prefer to use them. I'm used to using them from building computers in the past.
Yeah, there's pros and
So
cons for both
yeah.
server PSUs and then ATX PSUs. So yeah, you can elaborate on that, mate.
Yeah, sure. And I'll just bring up some pictures here just to show kind of the difference. So this is an ATX PSU. This is EVA. And there's obviously different standards and ratings, and everyone's like, oh, you have to buy titanium rated.
Yeah.
And look, if you want to, go ahead, spend the extra money. I've used gold, and it's never been a problem.
Yeah.
So I mean,
what that means is basically the efficiency of the PSU. So how much power actually is, I was going to say projected, but extruded from the power supply and utilized by your components.
exactly right. And there's obviously there's pros and cons. I mean, we'll post these links later, but when you look at it, it's really, you gain some efficiencies when you get higher.
Yeah,
But it's incremental. I mean, you're talking from an 80 plus gold, it's 87%, depending on where you're at, up versus like 90 to 92. So I mean, it's incremental gains, right?
yeah.
In efficiency. So I mean, when you
And
look
that's
at
just
it
one
from
thing
that,
you have to weigh up, because the price difference from, say, a gold to a titanium rated PSU is uh, somewhat
pretty massive.
significant as well.
Yeah,
And the percentage gain, like you just mentioned there, it's pretty incremental. So just something you have to weigh up and find that balance.
that's exactly right. So again, I go right in the middle with gold. I've never had an issue with
Yeah.
PS. And usually, I mean, actually, I've had issues with ATX, but it's usually been like a manufacturer issue, and you usually buy them, at a retail store, and you can return them, and
Yeah.
not a problem. So that's ATX. There's also server PSUs as well, which are hence the name. They are mainly for servers, right? Which
Yep.
are larger computer systems.
And just from
Parallel
a sort
mine,
of
yeah,
just an appearance point of view, these look a little bit more intimidating for the average person as well.
they do. I mean, you look at all this equipment here, and you're like, wow, what am I getting into? And they're loud, and there's a lot
Yeah.
more connection points, I would say.
Yep.
Um, but they are, they can be, a lot more efficient. They're good for large farms and scaling and things of that
Yeah,
nature. So
expandability tends to be a lot larger there as well, because you got the breakout boards, which allow multiple or a lot more connections, and it's depending on the size of the ATX power supply that you do purchase.
exactly right. And, there's again, points of failure with these as well, right? So I think, the main thing is ensuring you have good cables, right? I
Yeah,
think that the power cables, the 8 pins specifically, get a low gauge. The lower the
yeah.
gauge, the thicker they are.
I'd
So
say like a 16 at a minimum.
yeah, exactly. And a lot of them, a lot of the ones that you just get as part of the package, unless they specify it specifically, they're 20, they're 18 is usually standard, you know what
Yeah,
I mean? Just with ATX even, but 16 or lower is recommended, and you'll have a thicker gauge, a thicker shield around the cable, and it just, it's definitely needed as you're sending, some high voltage through there.
yeah.
So definitely
Constantly as
something.
well. So you want them, yeah, your rig's basically up 24/7 to try and uh, be as profitable as possible. But then alongside that comes the wear and tear. And if you're putting through a high current and a smaller cable, they do tend to get warm, and you don't want that.
No, they deteriorate for sure. And then, that's where you have fires and all sorts of things. So definitely think about that, and that, that's important too. So, you know, power rating is very important. So just because you have a 1400 watt PSU doesn't mean you can put 1400 watts worth of
No, no.
GPUs on there and call it a day. So, there's
Yeah, so there's
definitely
a general
the
sort of
80%. Yeah,
yeah, I was just about to say there's a general rule of thumb of about 80% sort of capacity. So like if you have yeah, so a 1200 or 1000 watt power supply, you only want to sort of push it to about 800 watts thereabouts.
exactly right. And the other thing to consider is there is some power that is being drawn from, other
Yeah,
items on the rig. Your
yeah,
CPU uses some power, and we'll get into that in a second.
yeah,
Your fans, if you're connecting it directly to your motherboard. So I always use a wall unit. I'm sure a lot of people seen them being used, especially with a lot of the miners YouTube videos out there. They're cheap. They're like $15. You can
yeah,
plug your rig right into it, and you can see what your actual power being used is. So
yeah,
I always recommend start off without any GPUs, plug your rig into the wall, and see just what your general power usage is
yeah. That's just your
before you
base sort of base draw from your rig itself.
exactly.
Yeah. I just got a
um,
question here,
sure.
or a comment just from Ergo Minnow. So, what do you think are ways that we can educate people on mining to make it less intimidating? So he himself doesn't personally mine yet. I think little educational videos like this go a long way as well.
Yeah, that's my thoughts exactly. And hopefully our goal of this video is to kind of give more insight on on mining in general, because it could be a little, daunting as you kind of look at it and you hear all these different components and where do I start, right? Where do I start buying these things? And I think it does take some research. There's a lot of good information out there. I mean, the internet is a powerful tool. And so is the community. I think if you come into, some of the ergo mining socials and you ask questions, everyone's there to help. There's some rough, people in the crowd, and you just take it for whatever it is. But there's
Yeah,
others that are very helpful and will kind of point you in the right direction.
yeah, exactly. So we've covered motherboard, GPUs, and power supplies. So what's next?
Yeah, so the next two, and we'll kind of try to cover these collectively, is the CPU or the processor, and then the memory, the RAM. And
Yeah,
really that's just, a lot of people probably heard that. You go out, you buy a computer, you want the best processor and the most memory, and numbers, whatever's the highest number you buy, right? Well,
yeah,
that's not really necessary with a mining rig. I mean, there is some minimums. I think with RAM, I would always, recommend 8 GB, maybe even,
yeah,
you can probably get away with a little less, but that's
yeah.
usually where I start.
A lot of people
Um,
sort of throw around the 8 gig for Windows based sort of
yeah,
mining, and then you can kind of push it down to say 3 or 4 gig on the Linux side.
exactly.
The price difference is between like a 4 and 8 gig sort of sticks negligible, so it's just 8 gig basically for me.
Yeah, same here. And I mean, sometimes depending on price, I may go up if it's comparable in price, just because you never know. If at the end of the day you stop mining, you have a computer with more memory and you have,
Yeah,
the highest memory, right? So I mean, look, again, that's not what's really needed here, unless again you're looking at functionality as a whole.
yeah.
You may want higher memory or even a higher processor. But I think the most important part that I wanted to share is compatibility is very, very
Oh,
important.
hands down, yeah.
So when and that's why I like ASRock, because they actually have a very, detailed guide on what to use, but you really need to understand, what CPUs are compatible with that board, because not every CPU can fit every motherboard.
Yeah, or
Um,
even RAM for that instance as well. So you've got,
exactly.
yeah, DDR4, DDR5, but then also your megahertz ratings then as well.
Exactly correct. And some of them, and I'm not seeing it now, but some of them have like a very detailed list of, this is accepted and not and whatnot. But
Yeah,
those are the two I would say that you should look at from a support standpoint. And make sure that you're buying, the right CPU, the right memory.
yeah,
And usually a lot of the sites, like if you go on Newegg, which is, a little bit overpriced, but you can use it to kind of build, right?
yeah, yeah,
You could pick a motherboard and they'll show you which one is supported. So it's, easier to kind of tie the two together.
yeah. And then just go and look across all the various sort of outlets then to find the best pricing.
Exactly right. Yeah, you don't need to buy there necessarily, but there's these tools out there that you can use. So
Yeah,
and the other thing too is, think power, right? So I mean, this says support CPU up to 91 watts. There may be an i7 that's higher than that. Just keep that in mind. There's other attributes just then,
yeah,
other than just the generation or the core, right? So I mean, it's more about what's really compatible with that motherboard.
yeah,
And buy the lowest watts, guys. I mean, you're trying to save power. There's really no, unless you're CPU mining at the same time and you're trying to activate, all your threads and use,
yeah,
all your power, go for it. But I mean, I usually try to stick in the 65-watt range.
yeah.
So,
Oh, that's
uh,
pretty self-explanatory there. Obviously, just check your motherboard. Alongside just the compatibility side, you've got different brands. So you've got your Intel and then the AMD. You can even run Celerons, Athlons. You don't need anything sort of special there. But then on your RAM as well, just check that your megahertz rating, and then yeah, whether it's DDR4, DDR5 sort of thing. For a mining rig, you shouldn't need a DDR5 motherboard. They're just
no,
uh,
yeah, I
overpriced
agree.
at the moment, personally.
Yeah, and check pin structure too.
Yeah,
Sometimes, it may look very close on your RAM, but the pins are different. It may obviously not fit your motherboard. So that's another important thing to keep in mind.
yep. So what's next on the list?
So storage, right? And I know there's a lot of disputes about what's best and USB versus SSD and HDD and but
M2.
yeah, what's the mining software that you're using? I mean, look, you could go on and on. I personally I use a USB stick for mining on my rigs. I'm using Hive, so I really don't need a lot of storage.
Yep.
There are some points of failure, but they're cheap and you can replace them for a few bucks. So I mean,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
I
Just got a
do.
comment here as well
Oh, sorry.
from Mine and Hoddle. So just PC
Sure.
Parts Picker is also a good tool for building compatible MOBOs and CPUs.
Yeah.
Thanks for that
Yeah.
little comment, mate.
Appreciate it. But I think it again depends on functionality and what are you looking for, right? If you're looking into gaming and you want storage to, store your games on your system and you need the additional storage, then, by all means go out and, spend a little bit more on an SSD or even an HDD, right? But I mean,
Yeah,
I think you can use any of them. Obviously the most cost effective is a USB stick.
yeah,
And again, you can use any. I would get 32 gigabyte. They're so cheap these days. You know what I mean? You probably
exactly.
spend $5 and
Yeah,
you're on your way. But I think you need. I forgot what it is now, but a minimum of like 5, 6 gigs for Hive or something like
I
that.
think it's 6. Yeah,
Yeah, something like that. Maybe it's gone higher. I haven't checked in a while. I usually just, ramp it up because you're always going to upgrade and who knows, the,
yeah,
the
and the
file size
cost
might get
is
larger.
yeah
It's dirt
once again
cheap.
negligible.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, so there's obviously sort of multiple different ways. So you got the starter SSDs and things as well. The M2s. There's pros and cons of using both. Personally, I like the SATAs, but then there's a pro on an M2 where you just take out another cable. Like with the mining rigs, they kind of become a cable spaghetti sort of thing at
Yeah.
times as well. So just one less cable is nice. But one thing to note as well, you can actually use an M2 expansion slot to add another GPU as well. So that's just one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and kind of, once you kind of pull it all together, especially if you're buying a mining board, you can go, they do have overviews. They'll tell you how to set it up and how to kind of connect everything. Like this, they have a specific mining guide.
Yep.
Which is I'm sure very basic. It's not specific to Ergo or anything, like that. But they kind of give you an overview of how to connect things and how to
Yeah.
pull it all together.
As you can see there, the spaghetti.
Yeah, exactly right. So
Yeah.
it gets a little cable management comes into play and
Yeah.
some worry about it, some don't. And it's just, again, a matter of preference. So
Exactly.
um backing up a little bit, there is one thing that I wanted to cover. Power cables. So we kind of spoke about that a little
Yeah.
bit. Obviously there are different power cables and there's different power ratings for the GPU. You don't want to overuse the cable, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you get these cables and you can split them and you can do all sorts of things with your power cables to give you more ports because you'll need them, right?
Yeah.
You look at a 3090 has 3 ports, 3 8-pin ports. It could get a little cumbersome because you can only provide so much from your PSU. Some of them only have 4 slots, 6 slots, 8 slots.
Yeah.
So something to keep in mind. There are power ratings for each of these cables. Obviously recommended depending on the cable. Obviously, 8-pin is probably the most widely used. There are some others that we'll get into that you should and should not use.
Yeah.
But they say a general cable is about 288 watts.
Yeah.
You do need to consider the power of the GPU, and if you are using risers, you also need to consider the power of the riser and what it takes to power that up. Rule of thumb is 75 watts, but most people, if you really test it, it's a little bit lower than that.
Yeah. You don't want to push it. And that's one thing to note as well is uh, a lot of the sort of PCI extenders come with SATA power connectors as well. So they're only rated to, what are they? They're 60 watts or something along those, or 50 watts.
Yeah,
I can't remember exactly
I
the
think it's
figure, but
60.
yeah. But the draw from your GPU is higher than the rating for a SATA power connector. So by all means, don't connect your risers with the SATA connector.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, there are some good splitters out there that you can use. Some frown upon it, but
Yeah,
if you're doing your power calculations right, and I always assume max power. You have
yeah,
to,
yeah,
because even though you may undervolt, overclock, whatever to reduce power, the things go wrong, you lose your overclock, and it's going to
yeah,
spike up to the max power. So just keep that in mind. If the max power is 300, even if you're running it at 150, let's say,
yeah.
assume 300, because things do go astray.
Yeah, so your max power or your total power draw TPD
Yeah.
on your card. So say something like a 3060 Ti or something along, or a 3060. They draw, or if you're over or you're under to 110 watts, something along those lines. And then if you have a splitter that's drawing 75 watts, so you're up around 100 and say 180 max sort of there. But if you do lose those overclocks, it can jump up pretty significantly, and they're not too bad because you can have one PCIe split, and it's not too bad because it'll be under that 280 watt sort of limit. So yeah, just something you have to keep in mind with the more powerful cards, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And then, again, you get a PSU, and there's a lot of cables that come in the box, and you're like, oh, this my riser has this port, I can use this. And be careful. There's Molex out there. A lot of the GPU risers even come with a Molex extension.
Yeah,
Don't use it. Look, Molex is a little bit better. I mean, I think it's if you want to maybe power up just your riser with it,
yeah,
okay. But I really don't recommend it for a GPU and a connection to your 8 pin. I just, don't go there. It's
yeah.
a risk.
The problem with the
Um,
Molex is there's basically a standard for PCIe and SATA and things like that, but for Molex, there's not really a standard for a power draw. So yeah, you kind of get just playing a guessing game there. So yeah, just kind of opt off
e-
on or go on the conservative side, I'd say. Don't sort of utilize it.
exactly.
Yeah,
And you lose power as you're splitting, and it's just
yeah,
don't use them. They're
yeah,
good for fans.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And then the one to absolutely not use is SATA, right? I mean, I
Yeah,
think that's more for hard drives, and
yeah,
great for hard drives. Don't use it for even your riser. You'll blow your riser, you'll burn them up. It happens all the time.
yeah,
So yeah, stay away
yeah.
from
By all
those.
means, don't use them.
Yeah, yeah, please. We don't want to hear the stories of people burning down their house.
No, no. And the unfortunate thing is there's so many stories like that, and a lot of people kind of catch it before it happens. They'll do like a sort of maintenance run over their rig and
Yeah,
just check all the power, and they can see the cables that are warm and sort of deteriorating at the connection points as well. So a lot of people catch it before it actually happens. But yeah, by all means, keep an eye on sort of this stuff because they are running
yeah.
24/7. There's a lot of power draw. So yeah, just maintenance is a big one.
Yeah, and I always say, I mean, as long as it will be warm, you'll have,
Yeah,
power is warm, as long as it's not hot to
hot.
touch. And
Yeah,
yeah, exactly, then you're okay. So I always do a scan. You can even take an infrared gun and just,
yeah,
scan it with that. I keep thermometers by it and see if I'm getting thermal spikes. I mean, it's, things to kind of keep your eye on. And then, you go into risers themselves. So there's a lot of risers out there. We were just talking about cables.
yep,
Problem pulling this up. There's several places to buy your risers. This is a website that's been kind of publicized out there, but gpurisers.com.
yep,
They're a little bit more expensive. The quality's pretty decent, but you could also buy them on Amazon. That's what I've been doing.
yeah.
Um, and there's just I would look at the ratings. You'll see who's buying what, right? So
That's one of the
what's
big things. I think the mining community's nutted out sort of the quality, even sort of like the no name side. But then you got GPU risers. But by all means, just read the reviews. A lot of people would have tried and tested all this sort of stuff as well. So just go with
exactly.
something that's got a really good rating.
Yep, exactly right. And again, use your and I think it's 6 pin at this point, but use the 6 pins
Yeah.
for power. I think it's just best. And these are, typically rated, as we said, at 75 watts. So
Yep.
again, assume that power when you're doing your calculations.
Yeah. So on the power draw from a PCIe slot, sort of negligible at the best of times. So that's just a disclaimer. They can draw 75 watts, but yeah, just definitely sort of keep that as a figure in mind.
Yeah, I think when
For the
I
most part, they'll
test
be drawing power from your PCIe actual power cable.
exactly. Yeah, I think I've tested it and it seems to be giving off, maybe 25 watts, but
Yeah,
how can you really measure it when it's all running?
yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Always go worst case scenario for sure.
yeah, exactly. Um, and then so now we're pretty much done with the rig, right? So once you have all those components, you're pretty much ready to go. But what do you do with it, right? It's like, all right, you have
Yeah, the fun
yeah,
begins.
yeah. So I mean, there's several ways to kind of build this, right? I mean, there's mining racks, open air, rigs, which we've seen people make them all different ways. I mean, you could literally people use wood, right? And
Yeah,
they build their frame out of wood and they size it all up. But the important part is to think about accessibility, right? Spacing between GPUs. There's some standards out there. It's all different depending on the GPU.
yeah,
But there's different ways to do it, right? You can go wide with 12 GPUs just across a single row. You can stack them.
yeah,
So I mean, there's definitely different ways to I've seen so many different ways. It's interesting to see, especially all over the world how people put things together. But
yeah. It's
there
just something to sort of keep in mind here from a planning point of view as well, because as we all sort of know, mining is pretty addictive. It becomes a pretty significant hobby pretty quick as well. So with that, if you've got it like the open air rigs, they can take up a lot of space on the ground. So the vertical options is a lot is a big sort of factor in my opinion. It just takes everything sort of and just stacks it up nicely. Yeah, it's just one of those considerations to sort of think about how you sort of want to build a rig or a farm, for instance, from the get go.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think spacing is everything, and once you buy one, you're not going to stop there. You're gonna so I always again when you're starting with your motherboard, think about that because
Yeah.
it's one today, but it's 12 tomorrow. And it's it's very easy to go down that rabbit hole. But
Yeah.
there's you can go online, you can buy a mining rack that's prefabricated. They're a pain to assemble at times. I have one. It's okay. It does its job, but I've also built one, and you buy some
Yeah.
L brackets from Home Depot or wherever your local hardware store is, and you kind of map it out, and I think
Away you
there's
go.
even yeah, I think there's even a blueprint somewhere that Vinny, the guy, he's from our Get Block,
Yep.
put out there once that maybe somewhere in the socials if you do a search. So there's definitely a lot of ways to build a mining rack. And then there's server cases is what I like to call them, which is your Octo miners, which I think is probably one of the larger brands that are out there. Which is kind of your all-in-one system. And here I'll pull up a picture here.
Yeah, just got a
Um,
comment here from Nick C as well. So he likes GPU rise, or they like GPU rises a lot. Has just got one Octominer R8, so it's super easy to set up, but him himself likes building his own too. So yeah, GPU rises for the win.
yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, but octo miners that I've been considering even converting over to them. They're really really nice. I mean, I think they take that riserless motherboard approach, right? So
Yep.
there are no risers. They're spaced right. You can kind of get that vertical, kind of setup if you'd like. And I think the biggest thing about them is kind of the thermal and the environmental monitoring.
Yeah.
So there's a device in there, and I forget who makes it, but it's basically used to monitor the airflow within the octominer, and then the server fans that are used will basically scale up and down depending on the environment. So it helps with the overall cooling,
Yeah.
and the thermal processing of the
That
GPUs.
a little bit of efficiency gain there as well by not running them your fans at 100% all the time, or even just 80% all the time. They could dip down overnight to say 40%. So there's a little sort of efficiency gain there. One thing that I really like about them as well is just the form factor. So we
Yeah.
touched on the space requirements earlier. It's for open air rigs. You can stack basically 4 or 5 in the same space that if you have a vertical sort of GPU rig, GPU mine, you can basically stick 3 or 4 of these in line, and you take up the same amount of space.
Well, there
But
you go. Yeah.
yeah, you can put X amount of number more GPUs in these as well for the same sort of footprint of space being taken up.
Yeah, and they think I saw a statistic the other day, but it's like 4% of Ethereum mining is all in Octominer cases.
Yeah,
So be interesting to see how much of that comes over to Ergo once the merge is complete. But yeah, I think that they've done a great job. I think they're making like 2,000 of these a month. So I mean they're starting to really hold their place here, and high quality. I think Vinny bought a few of them, and he's starting to convert his farms over to octo
yeah,
miners. We see Son of a Tech is doing the same thing. Um, so I mean, if for simplicity, they are a little bit more money, but that could be an easier way to go versus kind of buying all the components and building it yourself. But
yeah. That just
kind of
ties
it's
into a comment that we've got here as well from Mine and Hoddle. So, in their opinion, the added cost is not sort of beneficial. They'd just rather put their money into more GPUs. So, yeah, that's one sort of consideration as well. There is a nice little benefit from the Octominer or the server case sort of side of things, where they tend to be sort of a plug and play sort of side of things. But yeah, with the convenience comes cost as well.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about is if you like to tinker and you like to kind of build things from the ground up, then maybe consider, an open air rig, right? Because you
Yeah,
can kind of, again, buy all the components. You could even make your own case, right? We've seen people do that too. So I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot of different ways to build a rig. So these are just kind of, very high level options, but
yeah.
seeing a lot of creativity out there, right? So
Well, just even the open air frames, you can buy the pre-packaged sort of ones that you don't have to you can just assemble yourself. And we've
yeah.
seen those drop significantly in price as well. So they're up around $150 just for a standard sort of 6 to 8 GPU open air frame. Now they're down to 20, $30. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is nice to see. I mean, I think many of us were buying everything around those times. So it's, you feel a little slighted looking at the prices now, but going back to what I originally said, now's the time to buy. I mean, don't, think about future state, right? So many of us were spending 3 to 4x to build these rigs.
Yeah,
And,
only a
if you,
short time ago as well.
yeah, so I mean, if you consider it from a price standpoint, you may find some profitability there.
Yeah, so that's sort of the housing side of things. You've got open air server cases and multiple sort of options there. Just alongside basically everything that we've just spoken about, there's different sort of options that you can kind of go down. Yeah, so where to now? What's next?
So I mean, and we covered this. I think we went into some detail in one of the previous episodes, but you have your rig now. What do you do, right? You've assembled it. It's working. You're able to power up Windows or Linux, and what do you do next, right? I think there's a lot of questions around that, but you need to find a mining software first.
Yep.
Or actually, obviously depend or determine which algorithm you want to mine. And, hopefully it's Autolicos and Ergo, but
Yeah, touch wood, that is your option. But
yeah,
it's fair to
exactly.
say, from the mining point of view, your business model's profitability. So we're not specifically telling you to mine Ergo as much as we would want you to, but obviously you're in a business now. you're in there to turn a profit, whether that's spec mining and you're waiting for that profit to be down the road, and you're mining something that's sort of not as profitable now, but you get a larger return because there isn't enough as much hash rate, for instance. Um, but in turn with that, you do have your costs of power and maintenance and your cost base for the rig itself. So yeah, it's just one of those things to weigh up and have a plan, I'd say, in regards to actually like a strategy of how you want to mine and where you want to mine and things like that. I think that plays into it massively.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that, the biggest thing, and I use this as, kind of my rule of thumb, but chasing the most it all depends on what you want to do, right? If you need to
Yeah,
convert, over to fiat and pay your bills instantly and you can't hold, then definitely go after the most profitable coin, convert it, cover your costs. And I think that's the way to approach it. If you're more into spec mining, you maybe you're a trader, you can do, technical analysis and kind of see where things are going.
yeah,
That's another way to treat it, right? So, it's kind of the old buy low, sell high philosophy. If
yep,
you're holding your coins, maybe it's not best to mine the most profitable coin today because it may not be the most profitable to, tomorrow. We see a lot of volatility
yep.
in every market. I mean, not just crypto right now, right? But I think that it's something to consider. There's fluctuation in pricing, and there could be some benefits to that too if you take that approach, right?
Yeah. I think an example of that at the moment, or just recent times as well, is Neoxa. There was a sort
Yeah.
of um, new sort of kid on the block, but then also this hit a 51% attack as well. So if you're sort of jumping over there, your coins or your profitability isn't has basically gone through the floor.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a scary thing, and it's unfortunate, right? I think that
Yeah,
it's sad that it happened to them, but at the same time, it's something that needs to be thought about as you're kind of developing,
yeah,
a blockchain, or even a fork off of
yeah,
another chain. It's think about that, because that's at least in the back of the minds of a lot of miners, right? What about a 51% attack? So
yeah.
yeah, definitely something to consider.
Yeah, so
Uh,
mining software, obviously, you've now sort of nailed down what you actually want to mine. It's onto the software side of things.
Yeah, and again, in this guide, there is a list. Again, I know that the fees are probably outdated. There are some new miners that probably should be listed on here, but there are quite a few. If again, I think the best way that I always recommend people, to find the right software is go to their GitHub, right? There's
Yeah,
obviously different software for AMD GPUs versus NVIDIA GPUs. So identifying again, what do you have, right, from a card standpoint. There are some that mine both if you have a mixed rig. So I think that's a starting point. Looking at their current fee structure, it does change over time. So understanding what that looks like, because that fee is coming out of your rewards.
yeah,
um and there's also optimizations, right, per miner. So I mean, for me, I heavily in AMD. I use Team Red Miner. For me, it seems to have the most optimizations for at least the cards that I have.
yep,
But that's definitely something to kind of factor in. But it's the software, right? I mean, it's software. It's the starting point, um, and it's what's needed to actually mine the algorithm. So I think identifying, and you could try, I've tried them all. I think many of us have, right? You try them, you see what gets you the most hash rate, the most efficiency, all that stuff, and then you weigh in what the dev fee is. So
yeah,
there's a lot to consider there, but I think that there's definitely multiple options, and you don't have to just pick one and stick with one, which is nice because it gives you some form of decentralization, right?
yeah. So from you've found your software. So what do you have to actually do now? So it's just a matter of basically opening it up, editing the bat file, put your mining address in there, and then just basically point it to a server location that's probably closest to your own location.
Correct. And when you download the the branch from GitHub, which is where most people get it, There will be the bat files. The bat files generally they'll have some examples sorted by the most popular algorithms. So you'll
Yeah.
usually have a starting point. Ergo is usually included in most of them. So we'll give you a guideline. Be careful. They may be pointing to not only the developer's address, mining address, but also a specific pool that you
Yep.
may not want to use. So there's some things that you'll need to change there. But I think as we said in kind of some previous videos, you will need a wallet. Obviously for the coin you're looking to mine. That's probably one of the other starting points. And then
Yep.
when you're going into that bat file, make sure that you're editing everything that would be relative to you, like your address and the mining pool that you want to mine to.
Yeah.
And just real quick, the other thing is you can go to the mining software's README, and there will be a detailed explanation on how to set up that flight sheet for that specific mining software, because it is different for every miner. So
Yeah. Yeah. Most definitely. Just along with everything else that we've sort of discussed as well, there's multiple options. The pros and cons for different types of cards, like you just mentioned, Team Red Miner tend to sort of be optimized for the red side, the AMD side. Then yeah, obviously on the Nvidia side as well, they've got sort of the more sort of like say even T-Rex more optimized
correct.
for the green side of cards as well. Green as in Nvidia.
Yeah, exactly. And LHR unlock is something to consider. I didn't really that confuses the hell out of people. So I didn't want to go down there, but there is, limited hash rate or light hash rate. I mean, people call it different things, but it was an initiative that NVIDIA took, what was it, probably a couple years ago to limit cards. There was obviously a shortage on chips, and GPU miners were out buying up all the inventory, and may have not been so fair for some of the gamers and others that were using the GPUs for other things. But yeah, there's definitely there's a difference there. So just keep an eye on that. And when you're kind of comparing what mining software you're using, what GPUs you're using, just take that all into consideration.
Yeah, by all means. Um, so built the rig, got the software. Now what? What do we have to do?
Now mining pool, and obviously I have a very biased opinion because we operate a mining pool. So again, just keeping it very fair. There is, I think, this tool, mining pool stats, which is used by pretty much anyone that's mining cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
All the algos are on here. There's all the coin. I mean, it's literally the only tool that I'm aware of that really gives full detail of mining pools for each algorithm. I have this pulled up to Ergo. Obviously you can see there's a list of pools. Get block is number 7. We fluctuate depending on the time of,
Profitability and everything like that as
yeah,
well.
all sorts of stuff, right? And
Just like to
so
say as well, like just to be fair across the board, obviously I'm a big advocate for GetBlock. Love what you guys are doing because you are innovating in the space by providing these smart pools and everything like that. But for a proof of work network, I just want to distribute as much hash rate evenly across pools as well.
exactly right. I mean, many people will go to number 1, right? And we talked a
Yeah.
little bit earlier about 51% attacks. Well, going to that number 1 pool and everyone going to that number 1 pool easily puts that there. We've seen even Nano Pool get very close, right? It was up
Yep.
in the 40s, maybe even 50 at some point, right?
Yeah.
But just definitely spread your hash rate. That's why we honestly got into the space, right? Because I mean, it's just when we started, there weren't a lot of pools. I mean, you look now that it's great to see that there's so many pools versus just there was one at one point, right? And it was Nanopool, and then I think Hero probably came next, or maybe even some of the smaller ones that were out there originally, like Crypto
Yeah.
Russia. I think there was a few that were around initially. Enigma Pools, also a community pool.
Yep.
So there's pros and cons, confirmations. I mean, fees,
Yeah. One thing to
payout
have to think of
structure.
from a miner's perspective as well, one thing you have to keep in mind is If you're joining a larger pool, your share of that pool is going to be less as well. So it can be, they might get more blocks, but you're getting less shares because there is a greater hash rate there. So you might even consider looking at something that is smaller. They might hit less blocks, but then when you do hit a block, you get a larger share of that because there is a lesser hash rate there.
Yeah, I mean, if you, and that's, something it will show you here typically, it will show you the number of miners on the pool, and obviously you take hash rate into consideration too, but just think you're sharing with all those people, right? Versus, a pool that may have, anywhere from 100 to 1,000, you would definitely get a larger piece of that block reward. And, and honestly, at the end of the day, it all offsets to a point, right? I think,
Yeah,
there'll probably be times where one pool is more profitable than the other, but it's all draw of probability, right?
yeah.
So
And I think
at its
if you're
best.
mining long enough, yeah, depending on what pool you're in, I think it's just basically time sort of just evens out everything as well. So you might have join a pool that's got more hash rate, more rewards, you get less of that share. But over time, say 12, 6 months, sort of thing, that all evens itself out, you would think. Well,
Exactly.
it does, yeah.
It does. And look, I mean, we've been a small pool with under 100 gigahash. I mean, we're still technically considered a smaller pool. Um, we used to get that all the time. I've been mining for a day and I don't get as much as I do on Nano Pool. Well, yeah, because yesterday we had, double the amount we would normally get in block. Like it's not as consistent, but
Yeah,
you have to give it, I wouldn't even say a week, a month. I mean, I don't think you see it truly in that short of a time frame
yeah,
from a comparison standpoint. Unfortunately, it's just, again, it's probability. It will balance out, but taking such a short snapshot, even statistically, it's not a good way to gauge it.
yeah. I think on that smaller time frame, people just want to see that small increments of sort of rewards just being ticked over into their wallet. Um, just from a confidence point of view, everything's sort of running nicely. But
Exactly.
then, yeah, if you do run, say, one in a smaller pool, one that just comes to mind, Enigma, like you just mentioned, they might not hit as many blocks, but then obviously when they do, you do get a larger share. But over time, it all sort of evens out. Yeah,
Exactly. So I mean, it all, again, it depends on what you're looking to support, from one standpoint. Look at the fees, look at the payout structure. I think that's important too. There's
yeah.
PPLNS, there's prop. There's a few others, there's some new ones that are coming out that make it even more complicated, but you know
Well, that's
uh
another thing to consider as well is what that actually means for a miner. Do you want to just give a brief overview of like the share things from PPLNS and all that sort of stuff as well?
yeah, sure. So PPLNS pay per last known share or last end share. So there's a window basically of shares, right? That basically it's what's used to calculate the block rewards.
Yeah,
So PPLNS itself, usually there's a window, and they'd say shares. It's not really shares, but I don't want to get too deep into that. But let's just use shares, and it's 50,000 shares, right? So
yeah,
that's the time window that's used to look back and calculate, how the rewards are being distributed. And the reason why that's done is it's trying to prevent pool hoppers and from people
yeah,
jumping on the pool, submitting a lot of shares, jumping off, and basically taking all the rewards. So
yeah,
it creates a smaller window. That way, it's fair to everyone, versus pay per share or even prop itself, where you're actually getting paid per the shares that you're submitting. So
yeah,
it's a little bit different, but it is, theoretically fair to the larger miners.
yeah. From
Um,
solo miners and things like that as
yeah,
well.
exactly. So, I mean, there's different ways to look at it. But again, I think at the end of the day, if you're, sticking on the same mining pool, you're not jumping from pool to pool, it really all balances out. But it could take some time for a larger miner to kind of get their shares acclimated on a PPL and S pool, just because there's so many shares being submitted in the way that it's calculated.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's nice little summary there of a or high level summary.
Yeah.
You can dive right in there and get pretty technical, but yeah,
Uh,
for the
you can
most
get
part,
into the
that's
weeds.
basically all you need to know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's basically gone through the component side of things, the mining software, connecting to a pool, and then what's next now?
I
Sit back
think
and count your
that's
money.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, I don't know if it's still stayed open. I'll try to share this. But you're mining. No, it's not going to let me connect. I'm not going to pull it up because it's going to show all my private information. But
Yeah,
you basically, you go to your miner, your mining software, and you'll see yourself hashing away, and it will show, that there's actually shares being submitted. So
well,
that's
that's
one
something
way
we
to.
can touch on is overclocking.
Yeah, good point. Good point. But before we get there, just make sure your shares are being submitted on the miner. It will show accepted shares. That's what you're looking for. If you're having a bunch of rejects, something's probably going wrong. It maybe your latency in the pool that you're connecting to. So keep an eye on that. And you could also confirm on the pool itself that you see, shares being accepted as well.
Yeah,
So make sure you're mining, make sure you're connected both on the mining side and the pool side. Again, running a pool, um, your mining software is usually your voice of truth.
yeah,
Things can go wrong with the UI and the back end that may not display things immediately. So that may, throw you off. But as long as you're showing that you're mining on the mining software and you're actually submitting accepted shares, you're in a good spot and you're
yeah,
still mining. So
yeah. Just to give you that
um,
confidence factor there.
exactly. And then overclocking, and there's a big world of overclocking, right? I mean, I think there's different ways to do it. There's simple overclocking. And what that is in a sense is you're adjusting the clock speeds of your core and your memory in order to gain either more efficiency out of the card or a higher hash rate.
Yeah,
Um, and
and
you
we're
could
talking
either
about GPUs here.
correct, exactly. So you can go over or under with your overclocks, right? So there's underclocking, overclocking, undervolting, overvolting. You hear all these terms and you're like, what am I doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um, I think the best way to start, especially with Ergo, is go into the community chats. There's a spreadsheet.
yeah,
You don't have to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch, but there's a guide that shows all the miners who have contributed, what their GPUs are, who the OEM is, because an MSI card versus an Asus card could be slightly different. The
yeah.
memory, manufacturer could be slightly different, and there's a lot of other factors there that we won't
The
go
silicon
down.
lottery.
Yeah, exactly. That
Mm,
that plays into effect too. um but start there, and then really you're adjusting your core clock, usually negative or backwards for
yeah.
Ergo, especially on NVIDIA cards, and then you're generally pushing your memory all the way to the max as far as you can before it crashes. um
And that's the fine line as well. Like you kind of want to push it without going over. And I tend to sort
exactly.
of sway on the conservative sort of side there as well. Don't just to sort of give yourself a little bit of boundary from you don't want your rig to crash, and with that, it just sort of for the peace of mind, you don't have to check it as often and things like that. Just
Exactly.
for me, my personal experience anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because I mean, you could sit there all day, and miners tend to do this, right? And it's like,
It's so
I
true.
want every drop of hash rate I can get, but it's like, take efficiency into consideration as well.
Yeah,
To me, that's the biggest factor, because I could push my 3090 almost to 300 mega hash, right? But it's like the power draws, so much higher, and it's
yeah.
so you undervolt, you do things like that to offset that, but really look at your efficiency versus what your hash rate is. And
We just got a
I
comment
always,
here from Mine and Huddle. They love crashing their rigs to figuring out the OCs.
yeah, I mean, look, that's the way I do it. I mean, start with, a recommended overclock, and then, you can, I always go plus or minus 50. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah,
You keep pushing it. It may crash every single time depending on the cards that you're working with. So don't let the first crash scare you. Because it will happen. Like, especially like I have Vegas, and Vegas are just known, they hate overclock adjustments and they just crash. So it's like, change it, just reboot it, let it start back up normal, and then if it crashes again, then you probably need to lower it
yeah,
or raise it, right? So I mean, there's two ways to look at it, um, but yeah, I mean, just adjust slowly. You could do, some larger tunes, 50 to 100. And then when you crash, you back up 5 or 10, and
yeah,
then you know what I mean. And some people even get it more incremental and go by ones, you know what I mean? But start large, then start to trim down.
yeah,
And it's again, it's also about stability too. So
yeah.
it
Just
may
on
be good.
overclocking as well. I think it's just fair to say, just give you once you do sort of introduce an overclock setting, just give it a say 3, 5, 10 minutes, sort of just to sort of level itself out and find that happy medium. You'll often see it might run fair for 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes sort of thing, but then it'll start getting hot and things like that as well. So you just have to give it some time just to sort of find that happy medium from the setting that you've just sort of allocated to it.
Yeah, and even, hours, right? I mean, you could
Yeah,
let it run for 24 hours and have a crash, and you're like, what's going on? Every 24 hours, my rig is crashing. Well, you may have your memory set a little bit too high, right? And you may be losing your overclocks and, increasing your wattage and blowing your PSU because you didn't rate it at 80%. No, I'm just kidding. It's, you just, there's definitely, a lot to it that you need to consider when your
yeah.
overclocks are more unstable. That's when the bad things start to go wrong, right? So I mean, it's just, consider stability and efficiency versus just pure power.
Yeah, exactly. I just got a comment here from FC. Hey, mate, welcome. Thanks for joining in. And he just says he appreciates what I do for ERG. So, yeah, all I'm doing is just giving a platform to be able to discuss these sort of things and provide as much value for the ecosystem. So I hope everyone sort of finds some benefit from this sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. So just on the efficiency front, like you just mentioned, it's depending this your power, the price of your power as well. That sort of ties into everything as well. Like obviously that ties into your profitability, but also the amount that you can actually mine as well. So say some people even get free power. I get free power for half the day with my solar setup. You can kind of push your power overclock settings then as well, because you can extrude more hash rate, but then obviously sort of clock it back at night when you're paying for power itself. Yeah, it's just another consideration as well.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I actually just converted my power program over to a non-fixed rate. We'll see how
Yeah,
that goes. But I'm not mining during the day because of the heat, right? And that's when costs are the most expensive.
yeah,
So I'm mining at night, and now I get a variable rate where it drops at night. My power cost, that is. And so when I'm mining at night, I'm actually mining at a lower, cost per kilowatt hour, which is nice. Now I may change that in the winter when, it's a little bit different here. You have different peak times during different seasons.
yeah.
But look into your power because, a lot of the calculators and things like that, they're based on 10 cents per kilowatt hour. It's not like that everywhere. So I mean, if you're
Definitely
using
not.
default settings, you could quickly be in the negative very quickly.
Yeah. I know some
So,
guys from the US are upwards of paying sort of 30, 40 cents a kilowatt
oh,
hour in the
it's
US sense.
ridiculous.
Like that's ridiculous. Like
Yeah,
here in Australia, my max is probably 30, 35 cents with the sort of recent increases. And that's at peak, at a peak rating as well. So obviously off peak and things like that. That's just something that you have to keep in mind. And this is sort of gets right down into the nitty gritty and detail of how to sort of try and make your rig as efficient as possible.
yeah, exactly right. I mean, power costs definitely do come into play these days, especially from a profitability standpoint. And I think, it, going back to efficiency, cooling, things like that, they do help. I mean, you may not think so, but if you're many people run air conditioners and fans and ancillary cooling. Well,
Yeah.
there's a cost to that too. And if you're running an air conditioning all the time, all day long, think about it. You have a 10,000 BTU air conditioner or whatever, right? And your rigs, if you do the calculation, you're probably putting out a lot of BTUs. So it easily eats up that cooling capacity. So
Yeah,
just
exactly.
another thing to consider.
Yeah, by all means. Um, is there anything else you sort of want to dive into? I think we've covered a lot of things here. Is there anything else you
Yeah.
can kind of think of?
No, I think we got it pretty well covered. I think we took a nice deep dive into mining as a whole and the component side. Yeah, no, I think we were pretty good here.
Is there any sort of questions from you guys in the live chat? By all means, reach out. I'll give it a minute or so, and we can answer a couple of questions if you have anything, or even just general comments. So just on mining ergo, one thing that I really like about ergo, is sort of touted as throughout the industry as well, it's just the efficiency from Autolycus as well. I think that sort of ties into, like you just mentioned, the cooling side. Autolycus tends to run cooler. Obviously, then you don't have as much as much of a cooling cost, but then also just the wear and tear on the GPUs themselves. It tends to sort of uh, prolong the life expectancy there as well.
Yeah, no, I mean I've even seen, I mean, I think a lot of us have mined ETH, and the ETH can be harsh on your GPUs. I mean, there's
Yeah,
even other algorithms that are even harsher, right? But I've definitely seen a significant drop in thermal impact, mainly with my NVIDIA cards. And, I've
yeah,
seen up to like 20-30% reduction in, just heat,
yeah,
able to run my fans lower, things like that. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot of benefits there. But, again, it goes back to, how are you treating your cards? How are you setting up your rigs?
yeah,
Because miners tend to push all their power through to the GPUs. So if you're
yeah,
not tuning them accordingly, you could easily be, I guess underutilizing the algorithm is a good way to explain it, because there's definitely gains if you're tuning it right and you're kind of, not pushing it so hard and more on the efficiency side of things.
yeah, most definitely. That sort of ties into a video I just watched. It was on Red Panda Mining actually, and he had a stock standard. I think it was a Gigabyte 3070, I believe. I'm not too sure if it was a TI model or not, but that just had stock standard thermal pads in there, and he was running doing like a benchmark from various other sort of algorithms. I'm not going to mention any names or anything like that, just to see what was going on, and uh, just running Autolycus or Ergo's algorithm. It was 20 sort of degrees cooler, Fahrenheit cooler than the other algorithms. And then once he actually changed the thermal pads, even saw even more efficiency gains there as well. So from a cooling point of view, I think that's sort of one massive plus as well for the ergo mining side of things.
Yeah, no, I agree too. And that, it's a good thing to maybe touch on too is, as you're mining, right, there is some maintenance that would be required to your GPUs mainly.
Yep.
Cleaning obviously is always good. Keep the fans clean, get the dust off, blow them out. But
It's amazing
you know,
how much the dust these things accumulate,
oh
isn't it? Just little
yeah,
static machines.
exactly. I mean, they can get dirty very quickly. But there's also thermal pads, there's thermal paste. So I mean, they will deteriorate over time, especially if you're, miner pushing your cards or, mining on a heavier algorithm. But um you look, people do it on a certain frequency every 6 months to a year. They'll just rip out their GPUs, change them, put them back.
Yeah.
Others wait till they start seeing an increase in temperatures and things like that. So there's a few different ways to look at it, but
Yeah.
definitely again, just like risers and anything that's out there, there's a lot of different thermal pads, there's a lot of different thermal paste. Read the reviews, see what people are using. because you can be buying stuff that may not necessarily work very well.
Yeah. And the
And
last thing
also
you want to do, like,
thickness.
yeah, thickness is a big one. But yeah,
Yeah,
one thing I was just going to say is to change them, it's a little bit fiddly and time consuming as well. So you don't want to be pulling them apart, putting them back together, and then having to pull it apart again. So you just kind of want to do it right from the first go.
exactly. And so, when you're there's a lot of videos out there, they'll show you how to do it, but when you're taking it apart, measure things, see what the widths are, measure the thicknesses as well, because you
Yeah.
could, again, very easily be using the wrong thing, and could even damage your card, right? If you're
Yeah.
not giving it thermal protection, and who knows, it may overheat. So
Yeah.
something to consider. I know it's a daunting task, but at times it is something that needs to be done.
Yeah. The first time you do it, you're kind of um, yeah, you're
Yeah,
kind of skeptical of your own ability and things like that. The last thing you want to do is just ruin this couple of grand card. Like obviously, if you post just at the peak times, and then even
yeah,
pulling like a 3090 or something apart, you're sitting there just got the shakes.
yeah. I mean, it is scary. I mean, you're literally taking it down, stripping it down to the bare components. So
Yeah,
it can be nerve-wracking, but it's there's definitely guides out there. You look it up for even your specific GPU model, and they'll show you how to take it apart, screw by screw, which is really
yeah,
nice.
yeah, exactly. And then you can see numerous people sort of pulling them apart on YouTube and things like that. So yeah, there's plenty of guides out there. I've just got a comment here from Mine and Hoddle. Have you considered renewable power? So solar. I've got a 13.2 kilowatt solar panel set up on my property here, and yeah, it's just constantly churning out excess power. So that's fantastic for me. The good thing about Australia here as well is the solar installation and the panels themselves are heavily subsidised as well. So I think like um, a similar system in the US would be upwards of sort of $50,000, $60,000, and I think we paid in US sort of dollars maybe 7 grand. So
Wow.
yeah, it's very very heavily subsidized here. So we've got that sort of benefit. Um, to be able to sort of utilize that in the US, like, yeah, that's a pretty hefty and significant expense there if you wanted to go down that road just for mining as well. So just one thing that sort of to play out in your mind, in your mind for your calculations. But I believe you guys, from the get block point of view, have gone down the renewable side or explored it at least anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously yeah, under construction, but definitely
Yeah,
using several renewable resources. And then even in one of our smaller farms, they're looking at how we can kind of use that heat, right? So there's a lot of
yeah,
heat that's extracted from the GPUs. So heating water, right? I mean, melting snow and things like that. So those are some of the things that we're
yeah,
doing. Which is really cool. But um, yeah, there's definitely a lot of different things that people can do to kind of offset not only their power costs, but maybe use some of the excess heat that's coming off those rigs as well.
yeah. One of the things that you mentioned earlier is miners tend to be tinkerers as well, and you mentioned being able to utilize the heat from the GPUs for like here I've got a pool, so I want to heat that. One thing, and I'm a plumber by trade as well, so a lot of people sort of don't know that. I've got a trade background. So setting up heat exchangers to be able to offset the heat from the GPUs generated into the pool itself. So that's pretty cool. But one thing with that, it can get out of hand pretty quick if you don't have your sort of thermostats and things set up. They can run around 40 sort of, or say 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty
Yeah,
warm for a swimming pool, so that gets out of hand
exactly.
pretty quick.
Yeah.
But then, like novel ideas for places where it does snow and things like that as well is just heating your driveway so you don't have to get out and shovel every morning. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think, there's definitely a lot of things that you can do to kind of, make it fun. And, if you want to tinker and, kind of, do some cool things with it, there's definitely that. But, back to solar. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, depends on which state you're in. And New York's, one of the most challenging. But, there's some programs where they're subsidize it, but there's all these hefty fees on the back end. So,
Yeah,
if you are considering solar, please, make sure you're taking a deep dive and see if there's any, the, fees in the small print that you may not necessarily catch from the initial deal, because it could, get you in the back end.
Yeah. And I know there's different sort of ways of financing for you guys as well, like
Mhm.
leasing options and things. So yeah, with that,
Exactly.
you may be able to lease, but then you're only selling at a smaller or a lower rate back to the actual sort of the company you're leasing from. So there's just little sort of considerations like that.
Exactly. May not necessarily be getting that power back to yourself and maybe
Yeah,
going to someone else to cover costs. So
exactly right. Is there any more questions or comments, guys? We might sort of wrap this up soon if you guys don't have any more. Is there anything we want to sort of touch on there, Rob? Any last words?
no, yeah, just good to be back and doing this again. I think we'll probably target something for next week. We got some smart pool launches coming up that we'll probably want to take a deep dive into. So, look out for that. And great to be here and great to see you again, CW.
Yeah, we've have had to sort of postpone a couple of weeks. Obviously, people being sick and being away and all kinds of bits and pieces. So yeah, we're trying to do these weekly, but yeah, obviously life happens.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Yeah, unfortunately, life comes into play sometimes, and we'll have to shuffle things around. But we'll make sure we definitely get the content out there as it comes.
Yeah, most definitely. One thing that I sort of want to touch on as well, maybe we can do it next week, is do a deep dive into plasma going live.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll touch on that really quick, high level. It's
Yeah,
been going well. We launched our what we call our standard pool or our official pool, which is basically just erg mining. And it went very well. The implementation was seamless. I was just talking to the guys, and it was like, literally done in a few hours, and off we
yeah.
go. And it's been very, very efficient, right? So I think blocks are on that pool are processing, basically within one block instead of five. And within 5 minutes, transactions are processed. So definitely working from a functionality standpoint. Next is solo pool, and then we'll also be launching a couple new new smart pools. So they'll
Good.
all be under Plasma. So really exciting to see.
Obviously, have to put out the disclaimer then as well of soon.
Yeah, exactly right. And look, I see others in within the ecosystem using Plasma as well. So
Yeah,
it's nice to see that other developers are able to benefit from it too. So
yeah. The beauty of open source frameworks and open source community as well is you have that cross collaboration, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and everyone's in it together. I think that's a fantastic thing, and
yeah,
I think that's the heart of Ergo as well. And I hope we don't ever lose that.
no, I agree. I think it's a win-win for everyone. We can collaborate together, and what benefits us hopefully benefits someone else.
Exactly. We just got a comment here from Nick C. Maybe we do a repad and repaste GPU in one of the live streams as well. So, um, yeah, we can probably do that and talk some smack along the way as well, because
Yeah,
it's not the most thrilling sort of thing to be watching, but yeah, it's something we can probably kind of keep in mind as well.
yeah, it's a little dry, but maybe we could find a way to do that. Maybe we do a fast forward session, in high speed or something, because it could be a long process.
Yeah, exactly. Or we do it, have a race or something like that. But then
Yeah,
obviously
there
one
you
of us will
go.
probably destroy one of the cards if we're sort of trying to do out compete each other.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
That's
no
fun.
dramas. Well, thanks, Rob. It's been a pleasure chatting once again. We might wrap that up, wrap this live stream up here. I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
getting caught up in my own words here. Yeah, we might wrap it up here, and it's been a pleasure talking once again, mate.
All right. Likewise. Thank you.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning in, and by all means, check us out next week. Thanks for joining. Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Cheers.